Hello people of YouTube, my name is JD Shadow. This is a special report, your news and views program about geek gaming culture on the internet. Coming up in the show today, we do have all the information about the Guild Wars 2 Heart of Thorns PAX Prime reveal of raids, and the notion that ArenaNet is going to be sort of completely independent from NCSoft when it comes to Guild Wars 2. We're going to be talking a lot about what they had said in the special report. We'll start right about now. Saturday and the immediate days following that proved to be a big time for Heart of Thorns and Guild Wars 2 and, of course, ArenaNet, because they at PAX Prime revealed their big announcement. First things first, jumping ahead a little bit, was the release date of Heart of Thorns. It would be on October the 23rd of this year, which is about what people came to expect. However, this came one day prior to the huge announcement that came onto the stage when Colin Johansson said at PAX Prime 2015 that raids would be coming to Heart of Thorns. The first raid, Wing, would be released 1 week after the Heart of Thorns expansion had dropped, with a staggered release of the other two Wings following shortly after. The rewards for these raids, which would require 10 players in order to complete, would be legendary precursor armor, which is kind of the first time that I personally remember hearing them talk about legendary armor at all for this game. Maybe someone can correct me as to whether or not it was available prior to this whole thing coming about, but as far as I'm aware, this is the first time we've ever heard of precursor armor or legendary armor. There's going to be more raids that are to be planned with new releases of probably patches or maybe the next expansions that they plan. But this was not completely a huge reveal because of something that happened by IGN. Apparently someone on Thursday slipped the finger a little bit and posted a tweet saying that raids were finally coming to Guild Wars 2 2 days prior to the actual announcement happening. Some speculated that maybe this was IGN breaking NDAs, or somebody at ArenaNet being sneaky and building hype for the upcoming reveal, or maybe just someone from IGN getting a little trigger happy. Either way, some people were not particularly happy that they had spoiled the big surprise. However, that was not the only big reveal that ArenaNet had at PAX Prime. Also at PAX Prime, they revealed a new form of trial. The core game would be offered as free, however there are some catches with the free version of the game, mainly that you only get 2 character slots, you only have a couple of bag slots, and certain features such as the PvP, the World v World, and access to certain zones of the game such as Lion's Arch would only be unlocked after an exorbitant amount of levels in order for you to access them, in order to stop gold spammers and farmers from being able to spam those areas. And the way that you actually unlock those features in order to be able to access those things at a much lower level is to buy the full game, which obviously now includes Guild Wars 2 Heart of Thorns. But the last bit of news did not come at PAX Prime as we had thought it might. Instead, a few days later, Massively OP'd actually posted a interview from PAX Prime with Mike O'Brien and Colin Johansson, and Mike O'Brien said, quote, "I look at free-to-play as a business model. We aren't going to go back and redesign the business model. It's not about monetizing free-to-player players. This is Guild Wars 2. Guild Wars 2 was designed as a buy-to-play game. Of course, with Guild Wars 2, you do not have a subscription fee. The old slogan, buy once, play forever, does apply in this sense." But then they get to a certain thing that many people have noticed within the past week. Apparently, ArenaNet had removed all mentions of NCSoft, which would be their publishers at least until now, on the website, and a new end-user license agreement that you had to agree to when you updated the game last Tuesday. In response to that, O'Brien shrugged off the question of why NCSoft had mysteriously disappeared from the site, saying, quote, "There is nothing tricky about it. ArenaNet is taking over the publishing of Guild Wars 2. And then Johansson kind of went about his little trolly way, saying something about ArenaNet having a base on the moon and that everybody's going to relocate there or something like that. I have no idea. Don't ask. Okay, so let's get to the big announcement here, which is the raids. And before we get to that, let's get to what exactly IGN was doing. Now, first things first, I think this is by far a honest mistake. This is something that a lot of game companies risk when you deal with this industry. You're going to have some things that might get spoiled either by somebody too eager or with loose lips, somebody who didn't know what they were doing, somebody who hit the wrong tweet out, maybe someone with an axe to grind, as we saw what Kotaku did with Sony and the PlayStation Home service a long time ago. Yes, we do still remember that Kotaku and yes, Gawker is still awful. In this case, I think it was just an honest mistake. Maybe IGN has something with ArenaNet who had a sort of controlled leak in order to get hype up or whatever. Honestly, I don't think it was that big of a deal when you come to think of it, because first of all, we kind of knew raids were going to come into Guild Wars 2 at some point in time. We just didn't know when. The big question was, when were they going to implement those and how were they going to implement them? The way that Mike O'Brien and Colin Johansson handled this was really awesome. I did like the fact that in a way they were kind of disappointed, but they kind of knew at some point this is just something that comes with the territory of video game and the culture of it. You have to take the good with the bad. Sometimes somebody will F up, somebody will hit the wrong button at some points in time, and IGN took responsibility and they deleted the tweet thereafter. However, internet things last forever, so hopefully people forgive IGN for that, and hopefully we don't get into this sort of mentality that we always have to hold a grudge on IGN for that. There's too much of holding grudges on stupid things anymore on the internet, especially on Twitter anymore. Please, let's not do that. Let's forgive IGN for that. Everybody knows that in an industry like this, whether it be games, movies, books, things are going to get leaked from time to time, and there's really nothing you can do about it. There's really nothing that you can do to stop that, because as much as you can stop it, there's always going to be some sort of hole that you don't see. And it doesn't happen a lot. Let me just say that right off the bat, that it doesn't happen a whole hell of a lot, and it's not that widespread as much as you would think it is. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a risk that they know is going to be there. It's always going to be there. It's always going to be something they're going to have to work around if it does happen. And to ArenaNet's credit, they didn't have that many leaks, if at all. There's been speculation, there's been some sort of hype, but there hasn't been very many leaks. So in that sense, I have to say that they did a good job, and we should not hold a grudge on IGN for that. Mistakes will happen. I've seen it happen throughout my life, looking at the games industry, playing video games, knowing how this sort of thing works. There's always going to be that risk, and unfortunately that just goes with the territory. Hopefully people will forgive IGN for that. Again, IGN is not like Gawker, thank God. But in any event, let's get to the raids themselves. Now, Colin Johansson did say that they didn't want to have this to where one person would be in a particular role and then another person had to pick a particular role, and he kind of touched upon a little bit of how WoW was like. I played WoW as a raider, and one of the things that I was really annoyed at was something that Colin Johansson has actually touched upon, saying that sometimes you really want to play as a DPS. I sometimes wanted to go as my mage. I had a fire mage and I really loved to play him, but I always got stuck either healing or tanking, and though I did like those roles, there's some times when you really want to try out a new class. You want to try out a new role because it's a fresh look on the raid. There's a fresh look of how you play a game, and I like that they are going to address that, but I don't think they've touched upon how they will address that, on how they are going to make sure that all classes are going to be useful within that raid. You would see sort of like the Firelands in WoW, where shamans were already benched before you even tried them out in that raid. That should never be. You should always have a use for class in a particular raid, regardless of what it might be. Homogenizing classes, that's not what's happening here. It's okay, every class is going to have a use. Now, hopefully it's in a way that doesn't devalue any other class, where everybody is going to have a role, everybody is going to have a use, every class is going to be able to contribute to the raid in some form or fashion. But there's really no indication of how they're going to implement that. I would assume that they're going to ixnay the whole tank, healer, DPS roles and just go with some form of way to have everybody be able to take on that particular role at any one point in time. And as you know, Guild Wars 2 was never known as that sort of MMO where one class would fill a particular role in just that role. There's no traditional tanking in Guild Wars 2. There's no traditional healing in Guild Wars 2. You can tank, you can have a tanky class. The warrior's obviously a good tanking class in that game, but it's not the be all be-all, end-all tank. It's not built around tanking or around healing or around any other role. There's always something else that a particular class can do. And I like that about the game. I like that about Guild Wars 2, that you are not shoehorned into a particular role. You're not shoehorned into a particular playstyle. Hopefully that carries over into raiding, and the way that they have said this so far, I am optimistic that perhaps they're going to do this right. Now, the other thing that I am worried about is that how is loot going to be distributed? That was one of the things that broke up one of my guilds when I was playing in Miss Pandaria, and that was already with me being tired of how grindy the daily quests were in that expansion pack, and that just sealed the deal with for me, is that there's more argument about who gets what and who gets into what raid that night, and that is this sort of drama that you're never going to actually avoid when you go into something like raids. But the way they can do this, the way they can actually implement this, is to not have a week-long lockout, and that is something that I'm not sure they should add that into this particular game. It is one of those things where I can probably live without lockouts after you've done it for 1 week or so. I don't know. I mean, in one way I can see where you might want to limit the amount of times a particular tune can clear a raid for a week, but at the same time, it's one of those things where you're not WoW. You're modeled like WoW in that you're a hotkey MMO, but at the same time, you're doing things your way. It's not something that's going to be, WoW does this, so Rift has to do it, and Guild Wars 2 has to do this, and DC Universe has to do it, and WoWstar has to do it too. It's all your idea. You have to make it your own, and this is how you make it your own, by being a little bit more lenient and giving players a fair but honest and difficult challenge to overcome. That's one of the other things I hope that Guild Wars 2 does right, is that I want a challenging, difficult raid, but I also want it to be fair. I don't want mechanics that's going to feel more like I have to go through a bullet hell game in order to understand what all the mechanics are. I want to be able to know that if I die or if I fail, that it's going to be my fault and not because of a cheap death. I don't want cheapness in the difficulty. I've said this time and time again. If you're going to make difficult raids, and there should be difficult raids, you need to make them to where they are fair and test a player's skill, not their patience. That is a huge thing that WoW forgot about, that Blizzard forgot about when they made the WoW raids, that you have to challenge a player's skill. You can't just challenge a player's patience to be able to go through mundane tasks in order to get what they really want to go to. But I think that they can handle this. I think they can actually pull that off to where raids are fairer and challenging and are more player friendly than elitist friendly. Let's put it that way. But then Mike O'Brien said about the free to try model of Guild Wars 2, and I have to say that they did as best as they could in order to not have gold sellers infiltrate this whole idea of trying before you buy. And it's a great model. It's an awesome model to have. It's not the same as free to play. I would call it free to try, because you have all the functionality of the core game. You are able to get the 80 no problem. You're able to get all that other stuff, but you have a limited access to certain things. You have to get to a higher level in order to access things like racial cities or Alliance Arch or PvP or World v World, that kind of stuff, so you can keep things safe from gold sellers, is a good thing. The only thing that I agree with ORPG about that doesn't make sense is that racial cities are locked off until level 10, which is kind of a odd choice in this matter. I'd like to hear more about just what exactly their reasoning was for that, because you can just go into a starting zone and just do the exact same thing that you would if you went into a racial zone. Maybe there's more people paying attention to map chat at that point in time. I don't know, but you're paying attention to map chat anyway, unless you have that turned off for some form of reason. But that's a really curious decision. I would like to hear more about just what exactly the reasoning was on that. But everything else seems to be reasonable. Everything else seems to be, in some form or fashion, a reasonable trade-off for having the game as free. And more to the point about racial cities being locked off around level 10, it doesn't take that long to get to level 10. I had a thief that didn't take that long to get to level 10 after I played the warrior for a little bit until level 80, and I made a thief, and it wasn't as bad to get to level 10 because I knew what I was doing. if you know what you're doing, you're going to hit level 10 before you know it. So it's not as big of a deal, but yeah, I would like to know what the reasoning is for that, because I don't think it really solves anything in that form of fashion. And the way you unlock the full game is to just buy the full game outright, and you get Heart of Thorns as a kind of bonus, actually, at this point. And I like the fact that they say, you know what, if you buy the game, then everything's unlocked and everything falls back to normal. And I like that trade-off. I do like the fact that ArenaNet tried as hard as they could in order to make sure that gold sellers have a hard time as anybody in order to do what they want to do with that free account, and you know what they want to do. Now, the caveat to this, the devil's advocate to this, is that they're probably going to find a way around it. And you know they're going to try to find a way around it. You know that they always will be trying to find a way around it. But I think this is a good step in the right direction. I think this is an awesome way in order to have people who haven't tried the game yet to try out the game. And it's a fun game. I'm glad I had the opportunity to actually try it, and I'm going to be playing more of it, obviously, because I had gotten the expansion, and you saw that from the beta weekend that I did on Reverent. The one thing that I had a problem with the pricing was that there was no real indication as to whether or not if you took out the core game that the price would drop, and they didn't really explain that well. That was the only real thing that I had a problem with, and I think that's the one thing that ArenaNet could have done better. But other than that, they're doing an okay job with it. I would just like to see a little bit more of explaining certain things better. That's all I really asked to do. In the point of time when you announce certain things, they should have never have let people rage about the price point of Heart of Thorns before they said, oh, by the way. They should explain that a little bit better, but that's digressing, and I've already explained that countless times. And then we get to ArenaNet sort of going independent with Guild Wars 2 on the publishing. They're taking over publishing of Guild Wars 2. Now, does this mean they're going fully independent? They're breaking off from NCSoft, or they are just going to still be quote-unquote owned by NCSoft? I'm not sure about that business relationship there, and they're just going to publish it themselves without NCSoft's help. If that's the case, if they are actually breaking off from NCSoft, then that is a blessing and a curse. And I'm going to explain the curse first, because here's two things that I am worried about. First of all, if they are going to go fully independent, then they need to have a long-term model in place, because what if tomorrow Guild Wars 2 falls? What if they fail? What if they go bankrupt? What if Guild Wars 2 tomorrow just no one came in and they all canceled their membership or whatever it would be? They didn't buy anything but the gem store, they canceled their pre-purchase of Heart of Thorns or whatever, and they didn't want to come to the game anymore. What other IP would ArenaNet have? What other IP would sustain ArenaNet to a point to where they would be able to say sayonara to NCSoft? That is the one thing that really worries me about this, is that if Guild Wars 2 for some form of fashion fell off either really quickly or over the course of time and nobody wanted to play it anymore and it became a desolate land, what other IP would sustain ArenaNet? Now, this may also mean that they could have another IP that they may want to announce, but right now Guild Wars 2 seems to be the only IP that is really well known that they have made. And really, that brings me to wonder if they may have another IP in store. Maybe they have something else that they can announce at another game show or whatever. Maybe they do have some plans for a new IP or a second game that they're coming out with, besides Guild Wars 2, besides anything that Guild Wars 2 would offer to players. And the other minor complaint that I might have is that there might not be any more checks and balances. You might have heard a rumor that maybe Activision went to Blizzard and said, you know what, you have to re-implement Flying Mounts in Draenor because that business decision you made is really hurting you. You have to do something. You have to give up the ghost here. There's probably not going to be that with ArenaNet now. But now that they've announced this, that they're going to have the publishing rights. Maybe this means that if ArenaNet makes a stupid business decision and they feel strongly about that stupid business decision to where they're the only ones that think it's correct, there's not going to be NCSoft going to say, hey, you might want to change it. You might want to find out what exactly is wrong here. So yeah, there's a small worry about there not being any checks and balances there in the terms of whether or not the decision can stay or whatever. But in the flip side of that whole aspect, maybe it's NCSoft that is preventing ArenaNet from doing awesome things, and many people have said that. now that ArenaNet is taking over the publishing rights, maybe they can do a lot of things that they couldn't do under NCSoft's supervision. And the free-to-try model was one of the things that many people thought was one of the things that NCSoft was preventing ArenaNet from doing. And that might be just one of the many things that they have prevented them from doing. One of the things that I thought perhaps they could implement in some form fashion in the future that could come in some form after this whole thing went about is the idea of add-ons like what World of Warcraft does, to where you can have like Deadly Boss mods, or you can change the HUD. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of creative minds who would love to alter some of the aspects of the HUD to fit more of their style, and you could do it in a way that doesn't promote elitism, sort of like Recount, which kind of made WoW into an elitist playground in a way, to where everybody was more focused on damage meter and how much DPS they can put into this particular character, or I'm not getting one stat above what I really need to be able to continue to run raids with my guild or whatever. That kind of stuff is not needed in Guild Wars 2, but more along the lines of things like HUD modifications and maybe something like Deadly Boss mods, because one of the things that I liked about Deadly Boss mods is that it worked as a second pair of eyes. Of course, you're going to pay attention to what the boss does. You're going to pay attention to the mechanics of the fight. You're going to be paying attention to where you can and can't stand. But there's only so much that one pair of eyes can do. There's only so much one person can do. And that Deadly Boss mods add-on served as a second pair of eyes, where if maybe you didn't see anything, or maybe you sort of have a little bit of tunnel vision, it could alert you saying you might want to move, you might want to get out of the way, you might want to make sure you're not standing in the fire or whatever. And those type of mods can be useful in order to learn fights better, and those type of mods can really serve Guild Wars 2 a whole hell of a lot, because there's a lot going on. Now, of course, you want to make sure no one's cheating with the mods. Of course, this is an MMO game. Not everybody's going to agree that mods are necessary, or that they're needed, or that they should be implemented or allowed in the game. But if you implement them in the right way, they can be beneficial to your game. You just need to make sure that you police them in such a way that it promotes fairness to all classes and it doesn't promote cheating within the game. Another thing is macros. A lot of people have been asking about macros for a long time now, and one of the things that I knew that Blizzard had implemented as far as rules are concerned is that as long as you are the one that presses the key in order to initiate the act of the macro, then it is allowed. You can't just have a macro automate key clicks. You have to be the one to actually initiate the action of the macro, and I think that's a very good rule. Final Fantasy XI also had macros to where you can just click a button and you can automate a particular action, to where you didn't have to go through all sorts of menus in order to get to where you wanted to be. And in Final Fantasy XI, macros were actually a required thing for a lot of players, because there was a lot of menus and you didn't have enough time to go through all the menus to find the heal you wanted. So macros were an essential tool in that game. Guild Wars 2 is sort of the only game so far, the only MMO game so far that I've seen that has not implemented any form of macros, and I'm not quite sure why. And again, this could come because of NCSoft blocking ArenaNet from implementing them. Maybe they didn't want macros to be implemented in Guild Wars 2. But maybe that's a good thing that ArenaNet is breaking off from NCSoft. At least it looks like it is. And hopefully during the long term, ArenaNet can sustain a good standing to where they can start to bring out other IPs. Maybe they have another IP that they have in store for us. You never know. But that is going to do it for this edition of the special report. Thank you so very much for listening to me ramble on for a good long while about Guild Wars 2. I know this was a longer special report than what I intended it to be. Please leave a comment down below telling me what you thought about the story, what you thought about what I said. If you have any agreements or disagreements, please let me know. Civil and thoughtful debates about topics I bring up are always welcome here. My name is JD Shadow, and that just happened.